Hello everyone, welcome to the last episode of our parallax and animation scrolling effects. This is going to be part 2 of the last episode and final part. Yesterday we went ahead and created the layout of the page that we want to create. So this is basically the final effect. So yesterday, let me show you, we built this tutorial that we made the layout of the page that we're going to add the scrolling and animations effect. So basically what we have is just HTML and CSS, no JavaScript. But ultimately today we're going to build this. So if I refresh the page, we have some animations that happen over here. Now take a look at this box. When I scroll, it basically has these animation effect and also these ones. You can see that these elements sort of move at a different pace compared to the other elements of the page. And ultimately, we have this super cool background sort of parallax effect down here. So without further ado, please, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, go ahead and do. Today's tutorial is going to be super quick because we've already covered all the concepts that we're going to use. So I'm going to reference the prototypes that we made and basically copy and paste and talk through the functions and methods that I use. So if you haven't watched the series, I'm going to put the link to the playlist that has all the episodes of the series. It's highly recommended that you watch them. It's kind of necessary for this part, but still I'm going to go and talk ahead about all the functions that I use. So without further ado, let me close this one and we go back to the one that doesn't have any JavaScript or any interaction yet. So one of the tutorials we made was parallax effect based on the amount of page scroll. So if I open the link to that prototype and go to the JavaScript section, I'm going to copy this from here and go back to our prototype and paste it here. So for those of you who watched yesterday's tutorial, you know that we created this element and we named it a floating box, right? So here we make a reference to the floating box. And then we also added some initial transform in the CSS part. If I scroll down, you can see floating box has an initial translate Y 30 pixel and rotate 45 pixels. So I just need to make sure they are correct. So this is 30. So if you notice now right away, we have our parallax effect going on based on the amount of scroll. And what we did really was to add an event listener to the window scroll and then got the amount of scroll that we have in the page. And based on that amount, we assigned and manipulated the transform style property on the floating box. So that's as easy as that. The next thing is making sure that we have these kind of elements here animate based on when they are in the viewport. So what I'm going to do in the CSS, I found the elements, which is called IMG box. So all of these boxes with borders, yesterday when we created them, we added the IMG box class to them. So what I'm going to do is initially set the opacity to be 0. Maybe change the background size to be 150% because we want to have this zoom out effect. And then I ultimately make sure that I add a filter, blur, maybe 5 pixels. So now this is going to be, these are the initial style properties, obviously because opacity is 0. If I set the opacity to 1, you'll see that we have initially these styles covered. So I'm going to make it 0. And then what I'm going to do, I'm just going to copy the methods that we use. So the first method that I'm going to use is called um, cumulative offset. So let me go ahead and copy this here in our JavaScript. Going to the JavaScript section and paste it over here, maybe on top of the, just like this. The reason why we're using this cumulative offset method is because, for example, one thing we want to do is basically when these images are within the viewport, we want to show them, right? The problem is that when you add an element, even this one is also position absolute. So if an element is absolute positioned in its container, which is a section over here, we can't just use element offset top because element offset top, as the name says, is giving the offset top to the parent container. And since these are positioned absolute, for example, in this case, it's going to be 0. And that is not what we want. We want to know the top of the element from the top of the window. That's why we need to basically uh, loop over all the parents of this element and see what their offset top is, and then add them all together. And that's what exactly happens in this function. You can see that there is a do while loop that goes over all the parent elements of that element that we care, and then basically returns the top and the left. And what we are basically caring is the top element. I'm going to go ahead and add another function which is called show element, which will be the function that actually shows the element that we need, right? So in this show elements method, what we have is scroll top as the first parameter, the elements that we are considering, which are all these images that are not visible right now, and the animation, which is a class that we add to reveal these, right? So I'm going to basically here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call these function show elements, and then I'll say 0 because initially the scroll top is 0. And then I just need to have a reference to all these images that we have. We called them, we added the class img box to them. So here I'm going to say cons all box images equals to document.query selector all, and then paste this class that we here. So we have a reference now to all of those images. And now here I only need to pass the reference, all box images. And then ultimately I need to add the class, which in this case I called it animate, as you can see, animate here. So I need to define what this animate is in my CSS. So I'm just going to say img box and then animate. Here, what I'm going to do is define an animation, and I call it scale down, maybe for 0.8 seconds, just like that. And then I also need to make sure that I define these animation as well. So I'm just going to do keyframes and then scale down. Let me write it correctly, scale down. And then this will be the reveal that we need. So here I'm just going to say 2 because we already have defined our opacity to be 0, filter to blur 5 pixel, and background size to this. Now I'm going to make sure that when I add this animate class, which basically triggers the animations, I want the final state to be opacity 1, and then maybe filter, I'm just going to remove the blurriness, so filter blur 0, and then also make sure that the background size is 100%, right? Just like that. And of course, with the animations, in order to have the final state of the animation to stay the way it is in the page, I need to say animation fill mode to be forwards, right? Just like that. So now we have everything we need. If I go ahead and save this, you'll see that we have this cool effect down here, right? And now if I scroll down, we are supposed to see these images as well, which we don't because we initially called the function once, which is this. So now I need to basically copy this function and move it also in our scroll event listener. So I'm just going to paste it, but instead of top 0 here, I just pass this scroll top, which basically is the amount of scroll, right? So if I now scroll down, you'll see that we have this effect, we have this effect, and that is pretty much what we wanted, right? So go back again, we have this, scroll down, we have this, and then we have this. And the reason why once we called this function outside of the scroll is because initially we want to still have this animation even when we haven't scrolled down, because we already know that this is in the viewport, right? So that's why we need to call this once outside. So the next thing, now that we have this function, useful function, we can reuse this for the text as well. This text, and this text, right? So in order to do that, I'm just going to call this function again, but instead for this one. And this is, if you have watched yesterday's tutorial, we called this class for this element that contains this slogan, right? So, and the same for this one, and the same for this one. So what I need to do is basically have the same reference as I have for all box images, but here I'm just going to say slogans, and then also I'm just going to say here slogan. Now, the same thing I can reuse the function show elements, but instead here I pass the slogans, and maybe I add a class reveal, which I'm going to add it in the CSS. So if I scroll up here, you can see that we have this slogan over here. So now what I really need to do is what I called it, reveal. So I'm just going to add slogan reveal, and this is the styles that I'm gonna add when I want to reveal. So initially what I want to do is make sure the opacity is also 0 on slogan, and also I want to translate it a little bit on the y-axis, right? So I'm just gonna say y-axis 100 pixel, right? Let me make this initially 1 so that you can see what I mean. So if I don't add this, it's right here. Now I add a transform translate y property 100 pixel. So now it goes down a little bit. And then finally what I want to do is here I want to add another animation. I'm going to call it text reveal, and I'm going to say the same, amount, maybe even bigger to have a different duration. And then I would define the text reveal here. So I'm just going to say keyframes and then text reveal. And then I already have defined the initial properties. I'm going to put 0 here so that initially, and then its opacity is 0. And then I will set the opacity to 1. And then I also translate it to be 0, right? From 100 pixels so that it goes to the initial position that it had. And ultimately, when I add this class reveal, the same thing, I want to make sure that I want the animation fill mode to be forwards so that it stays with these sort of styles that we added to the final state of the animation, right? So now if I save it, if I refresh, you can see that we have this cool style over here, but also I would like to give it a little bit of a delay so that it starts showing the image first and then it shows the text. So I can say animation delay and maybe zero point 0.4 seconds, right? So now if I save it, you'll see that it shows this, and then after 400 milliseconds, it basically adds this animation. And the same goes with this ones, the same way we added for the top box. We also need to add this function or method inside the event listener of the scroll so that it kind of knows what is the scroll top or the amount of scroll that we have on the page, right? So now if I save it, if I scroll down, you'll see how awesome this image comes and then this image comes, right? The next thing I want to add is the sort of effect that we have for the background transition on this image, right? And that is also pretty easy since we already covered it. So what I need to do, I'm just going to copy the method that we used in that tutorial. Again, you need to watch that tutorial. Uh, so here, I'm going to add another function that we're going to use for the sort of parallax effect on this image, which is this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a class parallax here to this image that we have. I already know which one it is, so I'm going down here, and this is the class banner img. So I'm adding another class called Parallax to this, and then in my JavaScript, what I'm going to do is, since we only have one parallax, we can just use query selector, not query selector all, but regardless, I'm just going to use query selector all. So I'm just going to assume that we have multiple ones. Document query selector all, and then I just say parallax inside this. So now I have a reference to that, which is down here. And then ultimately, I'm just going to copy the code that we needed for this to happen. So, and this obviously happens in the scroll event listener. So I'm just going to open up a little bit space and copy the page, copy the parallax. So you can see what happens is that if I now go ahead and scroll down, you'll see that I need to give a little bit of a height to the window. So I'm just going to go to our CSS and say, let's add, let's give a little bit of a higher, maybe 500 pixel, right? Or 600 pixel. Save it like that. And now you can see that we already have our effect, which is the parallax scrolling effect on this box as well. Let me tell you what happened. So first, I basically I created a reference to the elements that have parallax. In our case, it's one, but regardless, it doesn't matter. We can use query selector all. And then in the window event listener, what I did was I looped over all the parallaxes. In our case, it's one. And then basically I got the top position and the height of it, and then the scroll amount that we have in the page, I mapped them to a very small value, which is 0 to. If I change this to, for example, 50, you'll see that when I scroll down, the amount of scroll that we have is not that much, as you can see. But if I change it to a higher value, minus 200 pixel, which means that I want the background image to move up minus 200 pixel, as you can see over here, right? But initially, you can see that there is a jump. As you can see, there's a jump over here. In order to fix that, I can easily go to I can add the parallax class at the end and make sure that the background position is actually center and 0. So center on the x-axis and 0 on the y-axis, right? So now if I scroll down, you'll see that we don't have that jag effect as well. The final thing I want to add is, if you notice in the original demo that I showed in the beginning, these images down here started to move at a different speed as its parents. So as the elements that are around it, right? To be able to do that, we also have another tutorial on this. So I'm just going to open that up. As you can see, these elements are scrolling at different or moving at a different speed. So I can just come here and copy this and then paste it in our JavaScript over here. So I'm just going to copy this maybe here on top of this. So we have a cards which contains the cards that we are carrying. So what I can do is just basically change these to maybe floating, and then I go to my HTML for those two images, which is the first one is basically, let me see where it is. The first one is over here, and the second one is over here. So I'm just going to add this class floating here, and then floating over here as well. So now we have these two contain the floating class. And now I can come here in my JavaScript, and basically down here I already have floating. And then uh, we're going to move, but what it really does is that it sets the scroll amount to be 0 and an old scroll amount to be 0, and then it loops over all the cards, and in this case the cards, we mean these ones. You can see that they already started to move at a different pace of the elements. We need to just fix the positioning of them, right? And in order to do that, what I'm interested, because I check if scroll top plus window height is more than card plus offset top, I can also add card.offset height as well over here. So if I save this, just going to make sure if I wrote, well, I need to add this ending parenthesis. So now you can see that scroll, they're quite high. And now in the CSS, what I can do, because I know I have reference to these boxes, I can set the top to be a little bit bigger than 0. So now you can see that it moved a little bit down so that when the effect starts, it starts from the lower place, right? So we have the second info IMG box, which is this one. And then I want the first info IMG box as well to have a top of maybe 100 pixel as well. So now you can see that this one already, let's just add a little bit maybe more as well. So now if I save this, you'll see that it shows the images here, and then here still, this is not correct. The reason being that we are using offset top, right? Here we are using the card offset top, but the offset top, as we know, they are not the real offset top. We have to use our method cumulative offset here and get the top from that. So I'm going to get this, instead of using offset top here, I can just use that method and then pass my card over here and then get the top value, just like that. So now if I scroll down, you'll see that now they are positioned correctly, right? It no longer overlaps because of the same concept as I told you, because this is positioned absolute inner. I can't only use offset top because that value will be 0. What I really care is the offset top from the top of the window, which is this amount, which I can use cumulative offset and then get the top value. So I'm going to put the link to this prototype down in the description so that you can actually go ahead and see and reuse these cumulative top, for example, to find the actual offset of the element, regardless of whether it's absolute or absolutely positioned or relatively positioned from the top of the window, right? So now you can see that ultimately we have our full sort of um, effects, pretty cool effects actually. I like them a lot. And then ultimately we have this kind of parallax effect down here. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope that I was descriptive enough. Obviously, for those who haven't watched the other episodes, this is going to be a little bit heavy if you're not familiar with the concepts, and the reason being that there are a lot of functions that are used that I have already described what they do in the previous episodes. So again, please go ahead and watch those episodes. If you had any questions, let me know in the comment section. Don't hesitate to ask any questions. And I basically wish you a very good day and night. So see you next time. Goodbye.